Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you are watching or listening. This is the Holistic Monitor, and I'm your host, Nick Sconia. The Holistic Monitor podcast is a weekly show featuring guest interviews with discussions about self-discovery, philosophy, spirituality, and our relationship with the world around us. Your support this last year has meant the world to me, and you can now go to holisticmonitor.com to support the topics you want to hear with our new show merchandise, featuring hats, t-shirts, hoodies, and more. You can also support us by simply sharing your favorite episode with your followers. And with that, let's get the show started. I'm Nick Sconia, and this is the Holistic Monitor. And tonight is the 75th episode for the show. So we've made it to 75, and we have a special guest on tonight, Jenna Talleda. We're going to be talking about intuitive nutrition, intuitive eating, and all things all about food and nutrition. So we're going to bring her on right now. How you doing?
Good. Thank you so much
All
for
right.
having me.
Excellent, excellent. And thanks for coming on.
Of course.
Your specialty is nutrition
Yes.
through food and through our relationship with food.
Yes.
Um,
Exactly.
and most specifically, the almost like the subtle nature of our relationship with food, something that maybe is felt more than it is spoken about or maybe directly thought about. It's something that we feel. Does that sound
Exactly.
some? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really great description. Um. Yeah. It's really about like learning how to tune into what our bodies are saying. And instead of listening to all of the noise out there about how we're supposed to eat or what our bodies are supposed to look like, instead it's more about listening to our own bodies and feeding them the way they need to be fed. And also, there's other components to it. There's like 10 different principles that are involved with it. And it's like for example, it talks about food neutralization. So, like, all food is neutral. There's no such thing as like a good or bad food. Yes, there's foods that have different nutrition profiles and things like that. But it doesn't necessarily mean there's any moral value to them, because we can easily create that moral value and think that it transfers to us whether or not we have it. And that ends up creating a lot of guilt and shame around that food. And it also gives it a lot more power than it deserves.
Mm-hmm.
And so, understanding like how we're putting that moralization onto that food, it really opens up and it shows us how we give that food more power. So,
Yeah.
um, because like for example, let's say that like tell me your absolute favorite food. I don't care what it is, just whatever kind of favorite food you got.
Well, I don't do favorites, but
Okay.
as a rule, I try not to single out anything. But
Okay.
let's just go with something that I'm, battling with would be pasta.
Pasta. Okay.
Mhm.
Yes. So pasta has been getting a very bad rap, because carbs are definitely on everybody's radar lately, and it used to be you know when I was growing up, everything was all low fat, no fat. And now it's not the fat that's the issue, it's the carbohydrates that are the issue.
Mhm.
So it's understandable. Um but let's say that somebody told you that you were not allowed to ever eat pasta again, which really isn't that unheard of these days. So
Right.
like what would happen if you were told that pasta was evil and that you could never have it again?
Well, and that's probably why I don't do favorites because I don't
Yeah.
want the relationship to turn into something that's an opposite. But Yeah, that would be so it would create in me a challenge to
Yeah,
overcome, some a hurdle to have to jump over, and I would be in a position where it would be me against it. It would
right.
turn it into another, and then I would be having a relationship with it that would be contrary and probably addictive at that point.
Yeah, it can feel that way. Now, I will say though that it's impossible to be addicted to something that we need for our survival, but it can feel that way because we feel like we just can't get enough of it, and we might use it for comforting or numbing or different things like that. But it's not possible to be addicted to food. It's kind of like saying that you're addicted to oxygen. Can't be
Hmm.
addicted to oxygen. So, but uh, when it comes to the food neutralization, what tends to happen is that if we put like this outlook on pasta, for example, and we say we're not allowed to have it anymore, we end up following this cycle that happens. So the restriction was put in place that we're not allowed to have the pasta, or we're not allowed to have a certain amount of it, or that we're only allowed to have it at certain times. Any one of those three things or a combination. Then the deprivation starts building up. And it could be fast or it could be over time, but eventually it gets to this place where we feel like we just can't take it anymore. And we're like, oh, I just want the pasta. And then all of a sudden it feels like you just can't get enough of it, and you feel like you're just eating it in quantities that make you feel uncomfortable afterwards, um, and you get the guilt and the shame that happens, and then the cycle then starts back over, and the restriction starts all over again, and it's just this vicious cycle that keeps going and going and going. And honestly, if you were never told that pasta was a big deal, that cycle would have never happened. And most people think that the issue lies in the place of feeling out of control. And so that's the place where they need to put the attention and say, oh, well, that means I just can't have it anymore. But actually, it's the restriction that triggers the entire thing to happen.
Mm.
Because if that restriction wasn't there, it would just be another food. It would still be delicious. It would still be things that you like, but it wouldn't necessarily lead on that path. um and so giving just recognizing that pasta is just pasta. Pasta is just another delicious form of energy that our body uses, and it's actually a very important nutrient. The carbohydrates and various things like that, it's very important for our bodies to function, including our brain. um and so it really does actually give us a lot of great things, and it's not anything to feel like guilty about from having, even if you have different health conditions that, like diabetes or something like that, where carbohydrates are like completely ruled out and you're not allowed to eat any of those. That's actually not true, because a lot of people with diabetes still need carbohydrates to function.
Hmm.
um but yeah, so coming from that neutral place, it really can change that perspective. um some other things that we talk about with intuitive eating, we also talk about um learning to how to change that food police voice that we have inside of us, into something that's more curious and compassionate.
Mm.
So, because that food police voice can be a jerk, and and definitely can sit there and read us the riot act and all of this for being able to enjoy something or having something more than maybe what you were comfortable for or what have you. But I find that shaming and guilt and judgment that comes with that voice, it's not actually that supportive. It
Mm.
might motivate us in the short term, but not in the long term. And when we can give ourselves more curiosity, like complete objective, innocent curiosity, without any sort of judgment attached to it, and we can give ourselves that compassion, it really just opens up the situation. We can actually see what's going on. Because I don't know about you, but for me, if somebody were sitting there and judging me, I just want to curl up into a fetal position and just say whatever, and never deal with it
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
But if you can be there and you can be curious and compassionate about it, you're more interested to kind of find out what's actually happening and how you can best support yourself during those times. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So would you say that now you work with clients
Mhm.
with to help with them with their relationship with food?
Yeah.
Do you see a lot of people coming in that are on the um, the diet roller coaster, where it's one after another, or just in a diet lifestyle where they're just in it? That's just what they
Yeah.
do is just diet. Are you seeing a lot of people just kind of in that zone?
I see people in all different phases, but with regarding that kind of diet mentality or whatever, whether they go back to back or whether it's spanned out over their lifetime, um, most of them do have that, because we live in a world that is very focused on rules around food and rules around food and rules around what our body is supposed to look like. So it makes there's a lot of pressure on us to take up less space in this world. And even from our healthcare providers and from just everyday conversations with people or what we read or what we see on social media, it's all around us all the time. And so, yeah, most of the folks are coming to me that have kind of been dealing with that. I also work with people who have eating disorders as well, and or disordered eating practices, where they might not necessarily have a full blown diagnosis, but they have different behaviors that surround their food. Um, yeah, a lot of those folks, and intuitive eating has actually been shown to be very effective with all of those different circumstances. And yeah, and so it even happened. How I ended up getting into intuitive eating was, well, for one thing, I was working with people who had eating disorders, but as I was reading the book, I realized that I actually had my own issues with food. And I didn't even realize it because it's so normalized in our world. And so as I'm reading this book, it was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I do. I do have like emotional eating, and I do have, I do have a lot of restrictive behaviors. I do have a lot of morality attached to food and trying to fight with the scale and making the scale do what I want and the scale kind of doing whatever it wants. So I ended up, you know, after I realized that, and after I saw how intuitive eating kind of helps switch that mindset so we can have a that healthier relationship with food and body, it's really made an impact on my own life personally, and I could see that it really affects so many other people just because of the world that we live in.
Yeah, I mean that. I think that a lot of people either have heard or they understand that good nutrition, good health, wellness starts with the intake, what we bring into our bodies. The gut health is a real commonly heard word there, gut health, right?
Yeah,
Where does activity and exercise fall into that scope as well?
yeah, definitely. Well, this intuitive eating on a whole is actually it is based off of feeling good in your body and feeling good about your body. So there is a gentle nutrition aspect of it, and there's also a joyful movement part of it as well. And like if I were to use my own example, when I was growing up, exercise was kind of torture for me. I'm not really an athletic type, and I just it just always felt like it was torture, trying to push yourself to these levels and
Right.
and that kind of stuff. And whenever I was dieting, I would definitely exercise to levels that weren't safe for me.
Hmm.
Um, but what intuitive eating talks about is if we take the scale out of the story, out of the experience, it's because the scale really is a very poor, uh, it doesn't say anything about what's happening inside your body.
Hmm.
Um, but if we take that out of the equation and instead we just focus on movement that we have fun with, movement that we love, um, making it more about that and focusing on all of the other things that exercise can give us. Like, for example, it can help us with our sleep. It can help go to the bathroom. It can help us deal with stress. It can help us with our heart health and blood pressure and different things like that. And taking that scale off of the table, because a lot of people will use that as a marker of success. Oh, well, if the scale came down or whatever, that meant that what I was doing was worthwhile. Well, it's not necessarily. I mean, because the scale doesn't necessarily always move, and whether it moves or not is beside the point. It's really more about what it's doing to help you, and also making it so it's about things that you love. So my my favorite joyful movement that I like to do is swing dancing. I love swing dancing. I haven't done it in forever, but that's my favorite of all time. And so because at that time, what I'm doing when I'm swing dancing is I'm focused on the music. I'm focused on my having fun with my dance partner and the steps involved and all of that. It just becomes the experience and the just having a good time. It's not necessarily about, am I taking enough steps? Am I is my heart rate up high enough? Am I exercising for a number of minutes, or did I burn enough calories? No. It's not about that. It's just about moving your body and
Right.
how you have fun. So,
Well, yeah,
yeah.
and it's important to to the use it or lose it kind of philosophy where if you, but in doing something you enjoy, that's enriching your life and bringing in positive energy into your life,
Yeah.
making the food and the things you eat more digestible, more pleasant, making
Yeah.
basic movements better. For myself, I really wanted to be a runner, and then I injured
Yeah.
my knee running because I just didn't warm up, or I didn't have the right kind of shoes on, I think is what my excuse was for that.
Yeah, it
Just wasn't able to
happens.
be a runner, but I wanted to get that spirit of like just being in the zone and getting cardio up. It wasn't for
Yeah.
me, and a lot of other types of exercise weren't really something that I enjoyed. What I did find that I really loved to do was hiking, going
Yeah.
for walks in the woods and up hills and scrambling up rocks and things like that. I found that more enjoyable.
Yeah.
So I focused on that versus going to the gym and doing some kind of routine consistently.
Exactly.
Just making sure I got outside, got fresh air, did a lot of
Yeah.
walking.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I kind of felt the same thing with the gym too, is that it was kind of boring.
Yeah.
Um, the exercise that was kind of the one that I tolerated, the one that I was okay doing, was going on the elliptical. And even just staying on the elliptical, oh my God, it was so boring. And the TV that was in front of me was always on something that I didn't like. Um, and and all I was zoned in on was like the calories and how many minutes I had
Right.
left and what
The
my heart
tracking.
rate was and all of that. And it was just it wasn't, I got so burnt out on it. And it even got to the point where I would drive to the gym and sit in the parking lot staring at the gym not wanting to go in.
Yeah.
And there were times that I just let myself go home because I was like, yeah, this is not going to happen. Um, but um, like, and even for folks, because mobility is definitely a real issue for a lot of people. Um, so like, and we get in this mindset, especially with diet mentality, we get in this mindset that it has to be a certain type of way, or it has to be good enough or something like that. And so even things that seem like you're not working out hard enough, they are still movement. Like, for
Hmm.
example, like if you just did stretches, or you did tai chi, or if you were something along those lines that felt like I'm not moving enough, or I'm not, getting my heart rate up high enough, it still is movement that's helping your body.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And then, of
Yeah.
course, the approach to food. If let's say a client comes to you, what is their
Mhm.
typical, what is the process as far as the meet and greet and how you do the intake with them? What can they expect?
Sure, sure. Well, for one thing, they can expect that I'm not going to be the food police with them. It's very commonplace that people get this impression a dietitian's just going to sit there and give you this meal plan and expect you to stay on it, like absolutely 100%, no excuses, and this, that, or the other thing. My approach is more about listening and kind of listening to like the messaging that the people have received, and also trying to reframe that in a way that's going to be a lot more compassionate and supportive, and with a lot of evidence-based information there, but not necessarily to make people feel like they've done something wrong and they're going to get in trouble with me, because they're not.
Mm-hmm.
um and also I treat everything like it's an experiment. Nothing is ever set in stone. Nothing is something you have to do for the rest of your life. It's just something to kind of try out and see what happens, and if it works well. If it doesn't work well, we can always tinker with it or go in a different direction and see how that is. um I have a group that I run. It's called Permission to Exist, and and in that group we talk about all of these different things about recognizing diet mentality, talking about how to feel good in our bodies and about our bodies without trying to take up less space in this world, and learning how to tune in to what's going on. And it's a really supportive and safe place for people to come to talk about what's actually going on with them, instead of feeling like, recovery from all of this stuff is not easy, especially when we're doing it in the real world where we always have these messages around us telling us to do the opposite.
Mm,
And so this is a safe place where people don't have to fear that. So
yeah.
yeah. So, and I have a vetting process to make sure people are the right fit for the group and things like that. It's definitely a really important passion project for me. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
And do you, you getting kind of enrolled into a community, so you have community support within the actions that you do.
yes,
Yeah. Okay. And that makes a lot of sense, keeping people on track with their relationship with food, how they think about it with other
yeah,
like-minded people, kind of in
yeah,
that same frame of reference.
yeah.
Yeah.
We have outside of our weekly meetup time, we also we have a running chat group. Like, it's a Facebook chat, and like if anything comes up, like uh any sort of situation arises where, like, maybe somebody was fat shamed, or maybe
Mm,
somebody was, like, they pushed food rules onto somebody else. It's a place where they could come and share what's going on, or if their inner critic or their eating disorder voice is telling them they're not supposed to eat right now. They can come in there and say what's going on, and we can have that real time talk to kind
Okay.
of work through it.
So not all based on society in the outside world, but also what's going on as far as inner urges and things like that. I imagine when I hear intuitive eating, I hear people, I hear things in my mind. I hear
Exactly.
comments like, yeah, I intuitively want to eat pizza and a whole lot of it. Or, yes, I'm intuitively wanting to have lots of ice cream and I don't want to
Yeah.
stop. What is what's the gauge, or what kind of, how do you create a stop point by saying like an amount? Like instead of a
Yeah.
whole bowl of ice cream, maybe it needs to be a scoop of ice cream or something like that.
Well, see, yeah, I know what you're talking about. But with this approach, it's a different kind of approach. Instead, it's about really tuning in to what your body is saying. And I couldn't tell somebody how full they are or what's going to be satisfying for them. Only they know that themselves. And now, mind you, it's our bodies do like variety. Our bodies do like having all different kinds of things and different kinds of amounts and et cetera, et cetera. So it's not that we're just sitting there and eating ice cream 24 hours a day or something along those lines. Plus, you probably wouldn't want to.
Right.
You'd get to that stopping point where you would just automatically say, you know what, I'm kind of over the ice cream. Um, but this is not a place to like make you start hating ice cream or something like that. It's just really more about the you know tuning into what your body is saying. And depending on how people handled their restrictions with their foods, whether they were like verbally, like they said I'm not going to do this, or they didn't even realize that they had restricted it, they might approach that food in a different kind of way. They might have that feeling of being out of control because they're still on that restriction binge cycle that happens.
Mm,
Or they don't feel like they can have access to that ice cream later. Or they feel like they haven't had it in forever, so they just it feels like that. But it gets to that
binge. Yeah.
point when you realize that you do have access, you do have unconditional permission to have food and get it whenever your body is saying so. Then it's okay to then you might find that there is that period of, we call it a refeeding time, where you're kind of just having more than maybe what you might think is comfortable, but eventually it gets to the place where you're like, I'm kind of over this and I'd like to move on to something else. um, People don't ever think it's going to happen, but it does. Some people even get to a place where they start craving things they never thought they would crave before.
Mm,
Like they might want, you know what? Gosh, I really just I'm in the mood for something crunchy and fresh. I really want a salad right now. Really
hmm
want that apple. That apple sounds amazing right now. You know, um, and they would never think that they would want that, but that's because it's always been this good or bad, and dividing food up in those categories. But once we can kind of bring that together and realize food is just food, then it that cycle ends up breaking and it doesn't feel like we're binging on that all the time. You know what I
hmm
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And
So
that cycle reminds me a lot of like cigarettes or alcohol, two very accessible forms of intake that are known to be fairly, addicting, using that
yeah,
word. Um, my own struggles with tobacco, I was able to stop uh, easily once I actually stopped. And then I started up to help somebody else stop under that same kind of idea that like we can just stop. And I had no problem the second time or the third time that I did it. And I found that it was really just something that was going on where I needed to rebuild my relationship with tobacco. through
Mhm.
certain methods. It wasn't just like, I'm done. I had to create kind of this different relationship with tobacco, knowing what it was, giving it its power, but also putting it in its place. But I always said that I would need to have access to it, and I would have to let this thing out if it wanted to be out. But that was the key. It was like it's a free cage, but it's caged. And for me, that worked really well to have it accessible, even to the point where I would say if you're quitting within about a month, to go and have one more cigarette to really experience why you don't want it. You know, make it your enemy,
Yeah.
make it terrible. It tastes terrible. It's not good for you. And you have a little bit of it in a month. It's nothing like when you're fully smoking.
Yeah.
Um,
I can see what you're saying there, except that again, food can't be addictive
right.
like tobacco and alcohol. I mean,
Would you
there's
say would you
chemical.
say sugar falls into that same um,
Sugar cannot
category?
be addictive because we
Okay.
need it for our survival. Every single cell inside of our body is designed to use broken down carbohydrates, which are sugars,
Mm-hmm.
as their first energy. And
Right.
we even have different body parts like our brain and our liver and our nervous system that exclusively only use those for energy. Like even when people are saying, oh, we can do only fat and protein and stuff like that, it doesn't work like that. Those body
Right.
parts don't really use that.
They
um,
starve. Right. They would
they
basically starve.
starve.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they wouldn't work at their fullest capacity.
Mm-hmm.
And it also takes those nutrients away from other functions they have in the body. So yeah, we there's really no way to be addicted to those kinds of things. It's really, I think where that all comes from is really the fact that it gives us pleasure. And
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
from like our puritanical roots back long ago, we were always taught that pleasure is evil and that we're not allowed to have food or things that give us that pleasure. Things when it comes to tobacco and alcohol, those are chemical dependence. Those do alter things in our brain and can make us dependent on that. But when it comes to food, it's just it's not a true addiction. There was actually studies were, that were done on these kinds of things, and one study in particular found that the dopamine levels were they did rise, but it was the same amount that you would get from petting a cute animal or hugging a baby or anybody who you love,
Right.
and so all of those things that we think are innocent and pure and those are okay to do, our sugar that we take, it's that same level. It's just that there's so much fear mongering around those kinds of things that we end up thinking that they really do have that evil part to them,
Right.
and that we need to restrict it, otherwise we're going to turn into evil. But it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
um so I have a funny little analogy
Hmm.
that I like to talk about when it comes to food morality in this sense. So like if you were to say like sugar is evil or whatever, and we talked about how it gives it that power and all of that. What I'd like you to do is that if you ever are thinking that this food is bad, or I'm a bad person if I have this, I want you to think about a doorknob. Okay, a doorknob is a very boring piece of metal, right? It's
Yeah.
very boring. It's not going to go do volunteer work, and it's not going to go rob a bank, right? It's just a boring piece of metal. All it does is let you in from one space to another. That's all that it does. Well, if you can do that with a doorknob, then you can do that with your food, okay? Because food is inherently neutral. There is absolutely no moral value to that food unless we as a society place value onto that food. And could you imagine putting that value onto a doorknob? Oh, sorry, you're an evil doorknob. I can't use you, or I can only touch you so many times. I just can't go through that door anymore because it's evil. But
Right.
anyways, so I want you to think about that doorknob. If you are thinking that your food is bad, think about it. Does it have as much morality as a doorknob? And usually the answer is no. And it's not going to transfer to you because it doesn't exist in the first place.
Right.
It's
Right.
really more about what we interpret it as. And if you consider like all of the things that we are inundated with, like whether it's documentaries about food, or if it's articles that we see with these really scary headlines like, oh my god, your head's gonna fall off if you have this kind of thing or something. All of that fear mongering contributes to that food morality,
Mm.
and it really doesn't deserve it. So it I found that there was a lot of undoing when I first learned about that concept, but once I was able to recognize how much morality I was placing on different things and being able to come from that place of neutrality instead, um it it really made such a positive impact, and I didn't have to come at it like, oh, I have to keep hands off that because that's bad. No, it's not bad. It's okay. Food gives us so many other things besides just nutrition. Nutrition is important, but it's not at the exclusivity of anything else. It gives us a sense of connection, celebration, pleasure because we have access to it. Because um, because it gives us comfort, it gives us so many different things. And if we only just close our mind to the just that it only has to be nutrition, then we're really cutting out a whole bunch of things that affect our lives, you
Mm.
know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's well put. Well, that's very insightful.
Thank you.
Where can the listeners find you?
Sure. So I'm on Instagram. My handle is your.nutrition.ally. I'm also on Facebook too under the same name. And yeah, that's where I spend most of my time. Um, and I can also share the information with you about my Permission to Exist group as well.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and I'll have all that in the description as well, so it's easy to click and link and find you.
thank
And
you.
yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for coming on tonight and for being here.
You're welcome.
It's definitely a pleasure, and it's always good to kind of get a reminder about what food is all about and how we look at food, and are we putting evil intentions on our food? Kind of an important
Hmm.
thing to think about, and I think likely that a lot of us are to some aspect or a non-favorite food that we're putting
Yeah.
some kind of morality on it, which is very important to think about just how we are viewing those things in our lives. Should they be more like the doorknob, more another thing that we use, that we utilize? And I
Right.
think that's completely accurate. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And anything you'd like to say before we part?
Um, well, the things I like to say with my clients is I usually do these little affirmations that you deserve to take up space and you deserve to eat. And it's very easy to think that we don't, but you do just because you exist.
Yeah, that's awesome. So good. All right. Thank you, Jenna. Again, really
You're
great to have you
welcome.
on.
Thank you so much.
Take care.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you are watching or listening. This is the Holistic Monitor.